Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today we're going to take a look at what I think I'm going to dub the Bronstein sacrifice. The person I'm naming it after is David Bronstein, the great, very nearly world champion in 1951. So he drew the first post-World War II World Championship match against Mikhail Botvinnik. The bad news was that Botvinnik was already the champion, so the drawn match meant that Botvinnik kept his title. But nevertheless, Bronstein remained an elite player for many years and continued to play really up until pretty close to his death, which was in, I think, around 2006. One of the most creative players and really creative minds in chess. If you have the chance to pick up his book, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, or one of his older books like 200 Open Games. There's also a newer book that was released just after he died called Secret Notes. All of these I think you'll find excellent. Actually, there's also another very old book about him called, I think, Chess Improviser. So anyway, very, very creative player, a real maverick in his chess, not just in terms of opening innovations, but just really in all respects. And again, not only in chess, but let's say in areas surrounding chess. So the so-called Fischer clock, well, Bronstein came up with an increment idea before Fischer did. Bronstein also came up with an idea of it's like Chess 960, but I think his version had the players each move decide where to put their pieces, and it didn't have to be symmetrical. So, a number of ideas like this. He was an early proponent of rapid chess before that became popular. Many years before it became popular, he would engage in multiple simul's, or let's say, I don't know how to put it, kind of a dual simul. So, for instance, he and Mikhail Tal once played each other simultaneously on, I think it was 8 boards. So, just a real popularizer of chess, a guy who definitely knew how to interact with chess fans. So a great ambassador of the game, both in terms of his personality, his writings. Another book by him that's fantastic is, of course, his famous book on the Zurich 1953 candidates, where he tied for second behind Smyslov. Anyway, that's who Bronstein is, and but let's discuss and take a look at what I'm calling the Bronstein sacrifice. So the first instance of it that I'm aware of, at least in Bronstein, is his famous game against Ernst Rohan, a Norwegian master. This was played in the 1956 Moscow Olympiad. So this guy was no Carlsen, but still a quality player. Anyway, Bronstein had white, and one of the interesting things about Bronstein was his love of museum openings. So he would play very old openings, sharp openings. He played the King's Gambit on many occasions, for example. Knight f6, knight to g5. So he played the Duffer's move, as Tarish used to call it. d5 takes, knight a5. And now, of course, the main move is bishop to b5 check. But I think Morphy played d3 at one time in some old game or other. And but Bronstein came up with a further innovation, or an innovation. Okay, h6, knight f3, e4, and I guess the main move here, such as it is in this rare line, is queen to e2. But it's not really considered to be any big deal. So knight c4, dc4, it just leads to interesting play. Bishop to c5 is the main move, knight f to d2, castles, and of course white cannot take the pawn on e4 because black trades and plays rook e8. So knight to b3, bishop to g4, queen f1, and anyway, it goes on from here. So this is just to give you some general picture of how the play can continue. This line, again, is not considered to be dangerous for black at all, but it's certainly something out of the ordinary, and I'm sure there are plenty of improvements to be found over the old pre-computer era games. Okay, but going back here, Bronstein had a very different idea in mind. He played d takes e4. And I believe after the game, Rohan asked Bronstein if he simply missed that knight takes c4 could be played. He just couldn't believe that the sacrifice was really intentional. And indeed, the sacrifice is not fully sound, but it worked out very nicely. Now, what has white got for this? He's got 2 pawns. They're center pawns at that. And they're not only center pawns, but they're in the center. So they're beautifully placed. White is ready to play queen to d4, which is in fact what he does. And he's going to try to drive these knights out of the game and simply dominate the middle of the board. And black has an extra minor piece, but if it's just going to choke on these white pawns, then who cares? What good is it? And this is what Bronstein tries to do. So knight to b6, c4, ready to play e5 now. Okay, Rohan played c5, queen d3, bishop to g4. And the problem for black is that he's never really able to blockade these pawns. So if black could somehow get some kind of death grip on the e5 square, then he'd be in great shape. But it's hard to do it. For one thing, his pieces aren't ready for it. And secondly, even if they were, then white could play knight takes e5. Let's say another piece comes to e5. And then f4 is forthcoming from white as well. So it's tough for black. So castles, knight e5, b3, so further solidifying the pawn on c4 and preparing to fianchetto the bishop. And you can see white's not even really afraid of exchanges, as long as he keeps control over his center, e5 in particular. So there goes that, f4. And I mean, you have this beautiful umbrella of white pawns here. And again, what are the black minor pieces doing? This bishop on h5 hits nothing. The knight on d7 is more or less dominated. And also, with white having all these pawns, it's not much for the black rooks to do either. While the white rooks at least have a job to push these white pawns forward. Okay, bishop to g6, maybe hoping to play queen d3. Nothing doing. Knight e4, queen f3, and more pawns. Just here they come, all of them flying down the board. All right, I probably would have been pretty tempted to play knight takes e5 here to just try to swap off some stuff, get rid of part of this pawn mass at the cost of giving back the piece. But the problem is, if you play knight takes e5, or at least one problem, maybe there's more, just takes, check, here, takes, and then knight c5. And white's up a pawn and has a 4-on-2 queenside majority. Should be winning pretty comfortably. So black played queen to b6, queen g3, and you can see the roller is going to continue on the queen side, on the king side now. f6, e5. Okay, so black has achieved something. He did get the e5 square, but it's closing the barn door after the horse is out. I mean, the white pawn is already on e6, and now here come more white pawns. Okay, and now unfortunately one of the white pawns disappears. So it would have been nice to have gone through the whole game with all 8 pawns, but this will certainly do. And this is a real crusher here. And black gave up. The problem is, if he takes, okay, let's say he trades queens. So, okay, queen g2, takes. All right, if rook f6, then we can just trade and play rook e8, winning everything. Or if g takes f6, then g7. Oh, sorry, not g7 here. Rook to e7. I was thinking with the queens on. But rook e7 just keeps everything stuck. Now g7 is a threat. And if black plays rook to g8, then he gets mated like this. He can't play king to g8. And this is probably what he should do. But, okay, white can do just about anything. After, can play rook f5. Can simply play c takes b5. I mean, he's up material, crushing advantage, everything wins. So that's let's say the prime or the original example of the Bronstein sacrifice. Okay, now let's take a look at a sound version of the Bronstein sacrifice, ironically by none other than Bronstein himself. So we've got a Ruy Lopez of sorts, but we're going to kind of zip ahead to this position here. All right, it wasn't a straight Chigorin. It was a little bit of a funny line. It was a Warmold attack. but we ended up with a kind of recognizable structure to be sure. Okay, d5, c4, b4, and a4. So this is a typical idea for white, closing up the queen side to some extent, closing the center for sure, and trying to dominate this knight on b7. All right. Black plays queen c7. One idea is to try to bring this knight to d8 at some point. Okay, not necessarily right away because a takes b5 and the rook on a8 is going to hang, but to play there at some point in the near future would seem to be on the agenda. Well, now white makes a really incredible move, and you might want to try to figure out what it is. It's a little bit surprising, I would say. Could be a lot surprising. Well, the move he played was a5. Now, of course, it closes the queen side. It prevents black from getting counterplay. But you might think that the pipe, so to speak, on the king side is a little bit too thin for white to break through. Now, in fact, there still are enough open lines there that it's possible. But still, it's a little surprising at first glance that white would play a5 and just close off any opportunity of breaking in on the queen side. And I don't know that it's necessarily forced to do that, but it makes sense. And what white is at least trying to do is prevent black from making any kind of active move like a5 himself. So it's an interesting decision, and one that I think proves to be at least viable. I don't know if it's best, but definitely it's a very possible one. Okay, well, black played g6, h4, king g7, and the idea with this setup is to try to keep as many lines closed as possible. So if g5, then fg, and then h5. Okay, white played rook h1, rook h8. Okay, and now what do you do for white? What is white to move supposed to do? So you might consider a move like bishop to d2, and then maybe doubling rooks on the h file, or putting the second rook on g1. Maybe trying to bring the king over to the queen side, or at least out of the way, in preparation of some kind of breakthrough, maybe with knight f5. But white's move is almost shocking, really. h5. So now black plays g5, and I should say who's playing this game. So Bronstein is white, I already mentioned that, but black is Felix Winowarder, or Vinovarder. I had never heard of him, but obviously not such a bad player to be in an event with Bronstein. So this was played in Krems in 1967. Anyway, after g5, you might be forgiven for wondering what in the world Bronstein is doing. First he closes the queen side, now he closes the king side, and okay, maybe it looks like a pretty pattern. You've got some kind of irregular Christmas tree, or whatever you want to think of it as, this pawn structure pattern. But how exactly is white supposed to try to win this? Really looks kind of bizarre. Well, nothing too obvious happens for a while. White just makes moves that certainly look good, but it's hard to see where they're going exactly. All right, so now white's pushed all of his pawns. And okay, enough fiddling around. White finally starts to spring into action at this point. So, of course, he had to have seen this idea, at least in broad outline, well before. Otherwise, it simply would have been insane to lock up the board the way he did. So what exactly was the big plan that Bronstein had in mind when closing up the board on both sides? See if you can figure it out. Well, here's the answer. It begins with the move Queen f1. So see if that kind of clues you in a little bit. Okay, black played bishop to f7, and now bishop to d1. And now the idea might be clear. He's going to load up on this pawn on c4, and then sacrifice. Bishop to e8, bishop e2. Okay, black takes control, but after knight to e3, there's nothing else that black could do. And it wouldn't have mattered if he had more time, I mean, you can give black all the time in the world to shuffle those pathetic-looking pieces of his around, and there's no other way for him to defend that pawn on c4. Okay, he could put a knight on b6 and just hang it, but or a rook on c6 or something like that, but there's no safe, not even a remotely plausible way to defend it. So of course Bronstein could see that he could simply load up here, and it wouldn't matter how ingeniously black maneuvered, he would be helpless against the sacrifice. So now let's watch what happens. Knight to b8, he takes, and what's black to do? He could maybe play bishop to e7, but the bottom line is that these queenside pawns are just going to advance. So he'll move the knight, maybe play c4, and go for c5 or b5, really at his leisure. Maybe maneuver the knight to f5 again first. And black's pieces, they're just suffocating. They have no space. They have no room. And white can just, again, prepare and then break. And black will eventually collapse. So black tried at least bishop to b5, hoping to swap off this miserable piece. Of course, all of black's pieces are pretty miserable here, but it entails a sacrifice. So knight to b6, takes, okay, bishop to e7. The rook threatens to run away, so we just take. And white could play c4, wouldn't be bad, but he has even better. Bishop to a7. And again, black's position is so constricted that he has no way to deal with the threat of bishop takes b8 followed by queen a6. He can move the knight, but then he would just lose the pawn immediately. So that's what he did. Knight to d7, takes, and poor Winnewarter had enough. The material balance is in white's favor, and these queenside pawns are just going to keep trundling down the board, and it's hopeless for black. So very impressive win by Bronstein, and a nice example. And finally, just a reminder, it's a game that I've shown you guys before, so I won't cover it in any detail, but just to illustrate, again, the power of these kinds of piece sacrifices, these kinds of piece sacrifices for a mobile center. So, there it is. Okay. So, this was, again, my game with you, Dawson. I had black, and just kind of zip through the moves here to get to the key point. Okay, so here I should play king h8. Black is fine there. I played this, which is a mistake, and he played that, which is a mistake back. Okay, so now the game is roughly balanced. Actually, it's a little bit better, but nothing too serious yet. All right, and here I should have played c6, but I came up with an idea for a piece sacrifice, but it was miscalculated. Fortunately for me, Dawson also miscalculated. So he should play b4 here, and then I'm in trouble. So I can get something that looks a little bit like the game, but it's not quite as good. But again, the point's not to justify the sack, but just to show the concept in action in a different setting. Okay, so he played c3. I played fe4. Again, b4 is the best move, but he took, and I took. So I've got 2 pawns for the piece, but watch my center roll here. So again, many of you have seen this before, but for those of you who haven't, I think you'll find it entertaining. And even for those of you who have seen it before, I think it's a nice way of building on what we saw before with the power of the pawn roller. Okay. So, big center. And with f4, he's trying for some counterplay, but now, of course, I have still another passed pawn. Okay, so now I have 3 connected passed pawns. But wait, there will be more. Okay, so here they all come. And now with knight to d2, I have a problem. If I move my rook, he plays knight c4, and despite having this big caterpillar here of pawns, it'll be cut in two, and the the little mini caterpillars will be immobile. So e takes d2, no problem. Okay, so now I have 4 passed pawns, and they're connected. They're not on distinct files, but still. And now I have 3 on the second rank. And now finally I'm ready to queen one of these guys. So rook d2, c1 queen, check, check, and mate. Definitely a fun game, one that I don't want to show too many times, but I showed this game on here I think about 2.5, 3 years ago. So I'm hoping there are enough new people in the meantime that this won't seem boring to you to see it again. Anyway, it is, I think, a nice illustration of the what we can call the Bronstein peace sack. So it's not a sacrifice for an attack. It's you're not going to regain the material. You're going to be down the piece for 2 pawns, but you're doing it to set up a situation where you have a mobile pawn mass, generally in the center or near the center, which will first of all keep the opponent's minor pieces restricted, but has the opportunity to go forward and do damage in its own right. All right, so that's the lesson du jour, or de semaine, the lesson for the week, and I hope you enjoyed it. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.